oh, you're not going to co-sign on our social policies? You're going to question our social policies? Well, we think that you're a bigot. We think you're racist. Which side are you going to pick? And I think there are probably a lot of women who switch sides because they look at their communities, they feel unsafe. They look at one party that gaslights them about it. You're not going to win anyone over by making your political project all about finding the heretics and purging them. I mean, these are people who voted for Obama twice. I don't think there's any self-reflection happening on the left at all right now.
Welcome to Doomscroll. I'm your host, Joshua Citarella. My guest is Ana Kasparian, a host and executive producer of the Young Turks. In school, you're studying journalism. What was your first encounter with radical media? What were the things that inspired you? Did you follow certain writers, books, documentaries? Like, how do you start to get interested in this field?
I did not get introduced to radical media or radical thinkers, really, until I met Michael Brooks, the late friend that I was referring to earlier. He was a socialist, a Marxist, and he made me very uncomfortable at first because his ideas were unlike anything I had ever heard before.
Yes.
And they scared me a little bit because at that point in my life, I had fully bought into the identity politics. And he was very subtly pushing against it. He was so articulate, so talented. I mean, he was one of the most talented communicators ever because I could try to say the same thing. I could try to make the same arguments, but there's something about me that like repulses the left when I try to make the same arguments that critique identity politics, whereas he would do it all the time and people would listen. They didn't find it repulsive, right? And it was amazing. At the same time, he was hyper-focused on class politics. And we would have these debates off camera, and he would persuade me because his arguments were well thought out. They made a lot of sense. And all of a sudden, I get introduced to radical thinkers. You know, one of my favorite writers, who's unfortunately no longer with us, Barbara Ehrenreich, absolute favorite writer. I thought she was absolutely brilliant. Mark Fisher, brilliant. These are people that I was introduced to by Michael Brooks. And so I'm not going to lie and say like, oh, I was always introduced to radical thinkers and I always thought in a radical way. No, it wasn't until I would say maybe 2018 where I really started to delve into this and understand what class consciousness really is. And the more I understood class consciousness, the more I understood materialism, the more identity politics disgusted me. And the thing about Michael that I think people need to acknowledge, because it doesn't get acknowledged enough, was that he was open to everyone. I remember when that story, that Central Park Karen story happened, right? Amy Cooper was her name. She's now in hiding. She's been in hiding since, I think that happened in 2020. Basically, she had a dog off the leash. And there was a bird watcher there, a black man who said, look, your dog needs to be on a leash. This whole conflict ensues, and she says she's going to call the police and say that, he's threatening her. Right. Well, it turns out this part of the story wasn't reported at the time. Turns out he did threaten her and tried to like get her dog to come over to him with a treat, which someone tried to do that with my dog, I'd be very upset about it. Anyway, long story short, when he was covering that, he prefaced it with this long spiel about all the anti-Karen content that was percolating in the media and how wrong it was, how gross it was. And at that time, I was doing a lot of that content. And I just felt so gross about myself because I'm like, yeah, he's making a really good point. Like, what are we accomplishing by taking these private citizens who, sure, we caught them in a terrible moment where they're behaving poorly, but we're taking those moments, blasting them, and destroying these people's lives. What exactly are we accomplishing through that? And he wanted to approach everyone from all walks of life from a place of empathy, understanding. That was the starting point. And that's the only way you're ever going to be able to persuade anyone or bring anyone over to your political project. And I wish the entirety of the left realize that. You're not going to win anyone over by making your political project all about finding the heretics and purging them, or determining who the good ones and the bad ones are in society. I think if you are on the left and you're under the impression that rapists and murderers can be rehabilitated through a reformed policing system or prison system, how the hell are you going to argue that someone who might be a racist or a hardcore corporatist can't be reformed or rehabilitated? The question is, do you have what it takes? Do you have the patience? Do you have the arguments? Do you have the strength to actually engage in doing the work that's necessary to persuade people? And right now, I don't think that the left is up for that project. They're far less interested in persuading. They're more interested in purging. And they're always going to lose as long as they have that culture.
Of the war that's being fought now, what are a few of these more prominent factions?
I feel that on the left, you have the corporate left. And I'm using the word left loosely because I actually agree with Vivek Chibber that we don't have a left in America at this moment. When I think of the left, I think of a group of people who are much more interested in serving, representing, and fighting for working class people. We don't really have a group of people like that in this country right now. What gets sold off as the left is, the corporate class, the corporate elite, which I think make up the Democratic Party. And then you have individuals who purport to believe in Marxist theory, but their actions don't really prove it. Their actions seem to indicate that they're far more interested in identity politics and representing various groups of people depending on where they land in their vision of this oppression hierarchy, right? So I think a perfect example is how this whole transgender debate is playing out in America and how the left in America talks about it. So for instance, women for a long time were considered oppressed in America. But right now on that oppression hierarchy, they're much lower compared to transgender people. And so when it comes to a topic like transgender women in women's sports, well, transgender women are more oppressed than women are. So who cares about the unfairness of including transgender women in women's sports? Throw biology out the window. If they say they're women, then by definition, that means they're women, not just gender-wise, but sex-wise. Biologically, we're just going to pretend. And that's turned a lot of people away from the left in America. I think the reason why the Trump brand of conservatism or republicanism is so ascendant is because so many people who used to identify as Democrats have essentially been purged from the party because they haven't bought into that oppression hierarchy. They believe in fairness. They believe in treating people well. They don't believe in discrimination, but these issues aren't black and white. And the unwillingness to kind of go along with it, the unwillingness to kind of shut your mouth and refuse to bring up any of the concerns that some people have been bringing up lately, as it has to do with these social issues. It's kind of torn the left apart. That obsession with intersectionality, identity politics, and just this refusal to really address class politics.
You've anticipated my next question, actually, because I wanted to ask you about this 2024 popular vote. Trump won historic margins with women, people of color, basically every demographic except white boomers. That is the Democratic base right now. How do we account for these historic shifts?
I think a lot of different things happened during the 2024 election cycle. For one, the Democratic Party just kept telling working class Americans that the economy was awesome and that they were complaining for no reason. Obviously, we're dealing with serious inflation. The inequalities that persisted felt like they got worse under Biden, not better. And the inequalities I'm referring to, of course, is income inequality, wealth inequality. These disparities just got worse because of the fact that housing became even more expensive and unaffordable. It's the one and only way that Americans were able to build wealth in this country, and that's kind of been ripped away from them. At the same time, you have exploding, prices at grocery stores. And the party that's supposed to look out for Americans, economically speaking, historically that was always thought of as the Democratic Party, absolutely abandoned them and told them, how dare you complain about this wonderful booming economy? Biden's been incredible. Now look, Biden compared to Obama, for instance, was a little bit better when it came to class politics, but not by enough, in my opinion. And so the messaging on the Democratic side was not great. At the same time, you have this faux populist, Donald Trump, essentially positioning himself and branding himself as a populist, right? Branding himself as someone who's really concerned about working class Americans, really concerned about unlimited, illegal immigration, depressing wages for American citizens. Like, he said all the right things. And so when you have these two sides where one side is telling you, basically gaslighting you about your current economic situation, and then the other side's like, you know what, this is messed up and I want to do something for you, it doesn't surprise me at all that Trump won the popular vote. And then think about this. I think the economic component is the most important component when it comes to politics, when it comes to elections. So Democrats dropped the ball on that. And then on top of that, the cherry on top is, oh, you're not going to co-sign on our social policies? You're going to question our social policies? Well, we think that you're a bigot. We think you're racist. Oh, your skin color's a little too light for my liking. I'm just going to group you in with all of the other racists in the country. You're part of the problem. I'm sorry, but if that's the messaging you're getting from a political party, are you going to support it? If you're basically told you need to shut up and co-sign onto whatever social project the Democrats want, you're not going to support the Democrats. So it doesn't surprise me at all that you have a higher share of Latino voters, a higher share of Black voters, even women, young women, deciding, maybe I'm going to take a chance here and I'm going to vote for Trump and see what happens. Now, unfortunately, I think a lot of those people who kind of switch sides are probably regretting their vote right now, especially given what the Republicans are doing with the big, beautiful bill, cuts to Medicaid, cuts to, food stamps. Social spending is definitely going to get cut in order to give tax cuts to corporations and the rich. Sure, some working class people are going to notice a little bit of a tax break, but the giant share of tax breaks obviously will benefit the highest earners among us. And it's unfair. It really is.
Orders of magnitude different.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The 11% shift in young women voting for Republicans is not necessarily recognized enough in the mainstream media. The idea that young men, I think, went 14, 15 points towards Trump, that is talked about ad nauseum. Young women went 11. Not a lot of discussion around that. It's very, very interesting.
Can I weigh in on that a little more?
Yeah,
and
please.
This is me speculating. I don't have data in front of me, but the reason why I speculate is because this is something that I personally felt. Now, I didn't vote for Trump. I didn't vote for Kamala Harris either. However, I don't feel that the Democratic Party takes safety seriously at all. In fact, if you bring up issues like crime, they will make you out to be a bad person for bringing it up. They'll just say, it's not an issue. We need to reimagine policing. But their idea of reimagining is essentially engaging in austerity for a social service, a public service. That's incredibly important. Policing needed to be reformed. It hasn't been reformed. The only thing that has happened is the culture in America has become so anti-police that now police departments are unable to recruit enough police officers in order to do their jobs appropriately. At the same time, there's been absolutely no reform. Prisons haven't been reformed. Prisons are still basically terrible places where people go to be tortured, to be maimed, to come out not as rehabilitated individuals who can actually be productive members of society and thrive. They come out far more broken than they were when they went in. And what was sold to Americans by the Democratic Party in 2020 was, we want to reimagine this by reforming, by making these places that are torturing people, essentially places where they're rehabilitated, where they're taught the skills necessary to succeed in life. None of that actually happened. A lot of money was spent on NGOs to reimagine policing or to help the homeless. All of that money was squandered because all of these issues have only gotten worse. So when I think about the party that's probably positioning themselves in a better way as we're going to keep your community safe, it's not the Democrats right now. It is the Republicans, because in lieu of actual reforms, you have Republicans who are like, no, let's go back to the tough on crime policies of the 1990s. We're just going to lock everyone up and at least you'll be safe. Which side are you going to pick? And I think there are probably a lot of women who switch sides because they look at their communities, they feel unsafe. They look at one party that gaslights them about it. The other party's like, we're going to do something. We're going to shut down the border. We're going to stop the flow of fentanyl, and we're going to throw people in prison.
We've alluded a few times to a previous manifestation of the Democratic Party, a different coalition, a different base. When did that exist? What is the period that maybe you're nostalgic for in this argument?
I don't want to romanticize the 50s. I know a lot of people do because of how the economy was really booming for working class Americans.
Yes.
But I am going to romanticize it, that part of it. The 1950s had all sorts of issues, especially as it pertains to the treatment of, Black people in America, just absolutely disgusting. And I don't co-sign to any of that. However, the FDR era, the economic policies that were in place, they certainly didn't go far enough for socialists, that's for sure. But working class people, there was obviously a lot more union power. Workers had a seat at the table. The economic inequalities that we see today didn't exist. And so when I think about an era where things were better for Americans, I think of, the 1950s. I think of the time when most Americans, most working class people were able to afford a home. My best friend's father worked at a grocery store, I believe in the bakery, his entire adult life. He retired before he was 65, had a fat pension, okay? It was a unionized job. That guy burns through money like crazy, and yet he still has more. And I think that's what everyone deserves. If you're working your entire life, you're doing what you're supposed to do, right? You should be able to retire with dignity. I'm not saying you should be able to retire and blow through money like nothing and still have a fat stack of paper left. But you should be able to have that economic security that my best friend's father has. That economic security doesn't exist anymore. A lot of baby boomers, by the way, who got to enjoy a better economic situation, don't have enough money in their 401ks to retire. Don't have a 401k period in a lot of cases. And that's terrifying. That scares the hell out of me. All of these elderly people that you see on the streets right now in Los Angeles, the fact that that even exists is like the greatest injustice. It makes me sick to my stomach.
A lot of them become seasonal workers for Amazon.
Absolutely, yeah.
I talked to some friends in advance of this interview. I said, I'm going to do an interview with Ana.
I'm afraid of what you're going to tell me.
Well, it made me start thinking about a few things, because some of the responses were, oh, she switched sides, something like that. And it made me think that, you've been on TYT since the beginning. You saw the rise of alt media. You saw what platforms did to our conception of mainstream and alternative media. Did the left change, or did you?
I changed a little on a few social issues. Economically speaking, I am to the left of the current Democratic Party. I have not changed in regard to the things I was saying on that Jacobin show that I used to host with Michael Brooks, my late friend.
Show.
All of those economic ideas, conversations, I still believe in. I actually went back and watched a few of those episodes prior to sitting down with you to make sure, okay, I want to really know myself before I answer your questions. But I have changed socially on some issues, right? So I think that for a long time, subconsciously, I just kind of co-signed to whatever the left in America was saying on these social issues because I knew pushing back even a little bit would lead to what I'm experiencing now, which is a lot of hit pieces about me, a lot of hatred toward me, a lot of claims that make absolutely no sense about how, I don't believe in racism. I absolutely do. I think that it's actually used cynically, though, by the left to gain political power. But when you look at the left in general, yeah, they've changed. And I think they've changed a lot on these social issues. If you go back to 2015, Bernie Sanders, I can't stop thinking about that sit-down interview he had with Ezra Klein for Vox, where he's talking about the notion of open borders. And he said, open borders is a Koch brothers policy. They want to exploit cheap labor. You're undocumented. You don't have any way of defending yourself if your boss is mistreating you, exploiting you, paying you less than minimum wage. That is obviously terrible in regard to the exploitation of undocumented workers, but it also depresses the wages of American workers. That is a fact. Bernie said that in 2015. I don't know if he would still say that today. He might still believe it, but it is not in vogue to say that in the modern Democratic Party, which is very much a pro-corporate party. It is not a party for workers. It is not a party that represents workers. They have abandoned workers, and they don't even know how to go back to understanding the plight of workers in this country. They keep trying and they keep failing because their identity is really just about the identitarianism at this point.
This topic of conversations around the border, a good friend of mine works in the labor movement, and I asked her off the record, how should we talk about this subject? Now I have this platform and I want to engage with these topics in a meaningful sense. And she kind of looks around the bar, like uncomfortably to see who's listening, because it is a very uncomfortable situation where low-wage workers or people who are on the bottom of the income distribution, there is downward pressure on their wages specifically.
Yes.
And we do see that those groups are the ones that shifted most noticeably towards the Republicans. I think that people who work in, elite email jobs, they benefit from it because then you have low-wage workers to deliver things to them in their fancy metropolitan apartments. But it is a very uncomfortable conversation right now. I wanted to ask you about the role of media figures. How important is it for us to prefigure the type of political coalition that we would like to see happen? Is the role of media figures to be an intellectual vanguard, to lead the charge and to try and move the center consensus towards their ideas? Or do you have to be some form of a representative of this heterogeneous coalition that you want to see manifest?
I think relying on media figures to lead the charge is a really bad idea. In fact, that's kind of been happening. I want to hear from workers over at John Deere, okay? Those workers who went on strike just a few years ago and managed to get some significant gains as a result of that strike. I would venture to say most of them are not far lefties. There might be some liberals in there, but a lot of them are conservatives. A lot of them probably voted for Donald Trump.
Yeah.
I want them to be part of the coalition because they succeeded. They know what it means to be part of a union and what worker power really is. And those are the very people, by the way, that would be rejected by the modern Democratic Party, and that's an issue.
Let's do a little bit of background. What kind of household did you grow up in? What were their political and cultural values?
So both of my parents are refugees, Armenian refugees. That's how they were accepted into this country. They came here legally because of a refugee program. This was in the late 1970s, early 1980s, when, obviously there was this big fight against communism. Armenia was controlled by Soviet Russia at the time. My dad wanted to be able to come to America and build wealth, right? Like he loved that idea. In Armenia, that wasn't even a possibility. His parents were much older at that point, and they're like, what are we going to do in the United States? And he's like, I'll take care of you. So he brought his family over, and he just started working for a company. It was a welding company. It was a unionized job. He was making really, really good money. He gets married, I'm born, and then 3 years later, that welding company gets outsourced. And he struggled, our family struggled, we really had a difficult time. But, in regard to like what my upbringing was like, my parents were very conservative. And so there was like a pro-capitalist message within our family, work hard, you're going to go to school, you get to determine what your future is. It all depends on how hard you work. There was that side of it. The other side of it was you have to be modest. You're a woman. I remember my mom would wake me up super early every Saturday morning so I can clean, like dust and clean, like a very like traditional household. My brother would like wake up whenever he wanted, watch cartoons in bed as I'm like dusting and I'm like, I hate this shit, You need to get married before you have kids. I don't want to have kids. That's been like a big area of tension with my mom, even now. But you guys came to America. I'm going to marry who I want to marry. I'm going to have kids if I want to have them. If I don't, I won't. I believe in gay marriage. My parents do now as well, but they were very old school where it's like, oh, that's unnatural. No, it's not unnatural. And it's totally okay. My husband's sister actually happens to be gay. And I remember my mom was worried that my dad would like freak out if he found out my sister-in-law is a lesbian. And so she talked to my fiance at the time and was like, do you think she could maybe hide that? And you want to know what I did on my wedding day? I had my sister-in-law, during the reception, when like you come out as the bride and groom and the wedding party comes out, I had her come out with her wife together to kind of signal to everyone they're married, they love each other, and if you have a problem with it, you can fuck off. But I don't want anyone to think my parents are bad people. It's just they were raised very conservative. Armenians are Christians for the most part, very into their faith. My dad didn't know I was an atheist until I was getting married, and he insisted on me having a priest marry us. I was like, Dad, I'm an atheist. He's like, no, you're not. He started laughing. It's like, you're kidding. You're not an atheist. I'm like, I am. He wouldn't accept it. I found a good middle ground for our ceremony. I didn't even hire. There was a really, really kind-hearted and very religious fan of the show, of the Young Turks, who wanted to donate his kidney to my mom. My mom was getting dialysis and she desperately needed a kidney transplant. I had just talked about it on the show once. And he just felt this need to help. And he contacted me, asked if if I would be okay with him donating his kidney to my mom. And I was like, I'm not going to say yes or no, because this is a super important decision for you to make. If you are interested in learning more, I gave him like information and then I stepped back. And this guy did it. Like, he donated his kidney to my mom and saved her life. He's very religious. He's a minister. He married us. And to me, it wasn't about the religion. It was about someone who's so good, so kind, someone who I actually put up on a pedestal as an individual that inspires me, someone whose goodness is so sincere. So for me, having him marry us was important because I want to model my goodness after who he is as a person, someone who's willing to sacrifice for others. But, I grew up in that conservative household and I did rebel in a lot of different ways. I was supposed to marry an Armenian guy. Armenians were victimized by a horrific genocide in 1915. And because of the 1.5 million Armenians who were slaughtered at the hands of the Turks, there's just this general belief that you should marry and procreate to repopulate the Armenian population. I'm an American. You're gonna move to LA, where it's like a buffet of beautiful people from beautiful places. And you're going to tell me, no, there's only one type of person you're able to marry? Hell no. I married a Cuban guy, and I have no regrets.
Your folks, for their political alignment, did they vote Democrat or Republican?
My parents had always voted Republican. I remember the earliest memory I have of my parents' politics was when they voted for Bob Dole, who ran against Bill Clinton, which is interesting because Bill Clinton was very much pursuing policies that they at the time were in favor of, like welfare reform. I remember the big issue at that time was, all these people driving Mercedes or collecting food stamps.
Right.
You know,
Welfare
very
queens.
similar to what you'll hear today from
Yeah.
the corporatists who want, tax cuts and they want to cut social spending. So that's part of the reason why they went for Bob Dole, but Bill Clinton's the one who did welfare reform. None of it made sense to me. Even then, like, I remember being aware of these things, even though I was like a little child. But in the Obama era, they voted for Obama. My dad loved Bernie Sanders. My dad loved Bernie Sanders. And it made me so angry to see the Democratic Party destroy his chances of being the nominee because he would have won. He would have won. What attracted my dad to Trump, who he voted for in the last, cycle, I think was the economic populist messaging, which of course was phony, but I mean, what did Kamala Harris stand for? Like, what would you say would appeal to someone like my 80-year-old dad who's worried about retirement, worried about what's happening, on a very local level in regard to like the chaos, the seeming anarchy on the streets. He's like, I want someone who like brings normalcy back to some extent, but someone who actually speaks to the economic concerns we have. Kamala Harris did none of that. Trump did some of it, and he voted for Trump. He didn't want to admit it to me, but I saw his little envelope where he wrote down how much he donated to the $20 to Donald Trump.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. To watch part 2 of this episode, you can support the show on Patreon. On this idea of audience dynamics, is there something that transformed among the audiences cultivated by these channels? That with the nichification, the expansion of the Overton window, that the attention economy itself had this effect of polarizing audiences in some capacity?
I do think that's happened. I think the biggest sign that I've noticed kind of rests in how Democratic voters behave and what their expectations are of you as you're giving them the news and commenting on it. So for instance, I don't hate Trump voters. I don't hate ordinary people regardless of what their views are. I think that we're living in a terrible time where there aren't really great political options for anyone, and people are trying to do the best they can with the options they have available. I get the sense that I'm supposed to despise Trump voters. Like, I have to hate them.
Right.
And if I don't hate them, then there's something wrong with me. That didn't exist before.
You're supposed to hate most people? Just
Considering he won the popular vote, yes, I am supposed to hate most voters.
Right.
And somehow that is going to, I guess, turn into us winning something. I don't really understand it. I think what I have today that I didn't have in 2016 even is this deep empathy. It's softened me as a person. So if you go back and watch some of my content from 2016, I'm like, it comes across, it's like faux strength, right? You're just trashing people. And unfortunately, that gets mistaken for being a fighter. I wasn't really fighting for anything. I was just spewing vile hatred toward people who voted differently from me. And all that did was feed into the divisions that we see in this country right now. And I have a lot of regret about it. And what's so funny is that a huge portion of the audience we used to have, they write to me regularly to tell me, you used to be a fighter, you're not a fighter anymore. And it's like, no, I used to be part of the problem. I look back at that content and I'm ashamed of it, but they look at that content and they think, oh my God, why can't you go back to doing what you used to do? I don't want to be part of the problem. And I think for a long time I was. Cenk Uygur, who's my co-host and the founder of the Young Turks, gets really mad at me when I say that. He thinks I'm too hard on myself, but I think differently. I think I should be hard on myself. And in fact, I think a lot of people in left-wing media need to maybe engage in a moment of self-reflection and ask themselves, what am I doing for society? Am I causing harm? Am I doing anything productive? Am I bringing people together? Am I actually making good arguments that persuade people to come on over to our political project or our side? I don't think there's any self-reflection happening on the left at all right now, at all. I think Vivek Chibber might be one of a handful of people who's interested in self-reflection. And I think what he says about the current Democratic Party is spot on. I love his work. And I wish people, I mean, look, if Democrats listened to Vivek Chibber, if Vivek Chibber was like a Democrat consultant, oh my God, like Republicans would be done. They'd be done. But instead, I mean, anytime Vivek puts out a podcast episode about identity politics or wokeism, we all see what happens on Twitter or X.
Yeah. Yeah, a friend of mine, Brad Trammell, we would talk about this frequently because we come from this background of media analysis, aesthetics, study of media theory from the art world. And this idea that I think both you and I grew up under, that more people watch Jon Stewart than Bill O'Reilly, and thus the Democrats and progressives will win forever for the next like 20 years or so. That format of having a person at a news desk making jokes about the other side was so easy to replicate that if you look at the media landscape now, it must be 10-1 conservatives versus progressives. I mean, the numbers on these things quantitatively are overwhelming.
Right.
There are many political commentators who have updated their positions over time, right? You spend enough time in the media, like you're going to shift on some issues inevitably. But those people change jobs. They change shows.
Yeah.
They have different people who pay them, which indicates that their opinions to some degree are up for the highest bidder. I can think of a few people specifically that applies to, but that is not the case for you.
Right.
You're on the same channel.
Right.
You're a producer of the show.
Right.
And you have maybe different viewers in some cases, but it's the same people who write the checks. Would you talk about how your political evolution has impacted your existing audience and the kind of feedback that you get from them?
I want to talk about how it's impacted the company, actually.
Okay.
So first, let me just say my decision to stay at TYT was very much an intentional decision. I refuse to be forced out of the place that I helped build. I think that I deserve to be heard by the audience. I wish that people would maybe listen to the reasoning behind why I've moderated on literally just a handful of social issues and just know me well enough to trust that what I'm saying comes from the heart and I'm not grifting. The reason why I didn't leave is also because, yeah, when you leave the company you've been at for 18 years, as you change or moderate a few of your views, it looks like a grift. It looks like your changes aren't sincere.
Right.
They're driven by a profit motive or something else. So for me, it was important to stay there to signal, no. First of all, no one's going to run me out of this place because I've had a change of heart on a few issues. Secondly, I'm not a grifter. No one is paying me to change my opinions. Look, I sometimes wish that I was that impressionable or that easy to manipulate or that easy to buy. You can't buy my ass. You just can't. And it's because of who I am as a person. I can't shut up about what I actually think. I wish I could because it's gotten me into so much trouble. I believe what I believe. And I explain the rationale behind it. I explain why I've changed. You either take it or leave it. A lot of people have decided to leave it. And that's been really painful. But let me tell you about the very, very toxic nature of what's going on right now. Those who are upset about my changes aren't happy that those around me within the company, because there's other network shows, haven't vocally and publicly condemned me. And so there's a portion of the audience, I guess TYT's former audience, that are hell-bent on destroying the entirety of that company, ripping it apart. And the way they do it is they launch these like pressure campaigns toward other hosts.
Right.
And basically try to get the other hosts to either leave the company, which some have, and didn't bode well for them. Okay, let's just put it that way. Because they don't care about these other hosts or their careers or anything. They just care about tearing me apart, tearing the company apart. I'm not going to name any names, but I kind of got the sense that of the hosts that stayed, some of whom were really, really good friends of mine, were afraid to be associated with me. And that's been really painful because they've distanced themselves. They haven't necessarily trashed me publicly, but I'm sure they're now noticing that simply distancing themselves isn't good enough for, these little tyrants online. And it's just going to escalate. And it's really up to them what they decide to do. But I wouldn't be surprised if the remaining hosts turn on me at some point. I'm just used to it. But I'm not leaving. Like I said, I started working at TYT in 2007 when the pay was garbage because that was the only pay that was even possible. When there were pipes leaking above our desks and we didn't care because we believed in what we were doing and we loved the freedom to speak and say what we actually thought. And that culture very much still exists on the main show. I think that the left has changed and it's become a lot less tolerant of different ideas or anyone who might be a little more critical of some of the, pathologies on the left. And so that intolerance, unfortunately, is impacting some of the culture within the company. But on the main show, the Young Turks, we've been able to maintain that freedom. I don't know how I found the only 3 Zoomers in the country that are open-minded and are totally on board with what we're doing on the main show. But I would do anything for my team. They're amazing. They're bright. They're incredible people. And we just wholeheartedly believe in class politics. I think that's what guides us on the main show. I know this sounds conspiratorial, but I really do feel that identity politics is this cynical ploy to divide people so they're unable to build the coalitions necessary to win. I really do think that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Skipping forward a bit, but this seems appropriate for what we've just talked about. How is Trump simultaneously both the most divisive president that's ever existed and the winner of the popular vote? How do those two things coexist?
Well, there's something intoxicating about a guy who says some of the most disgusting things in an era of cancellation. He comes across as strong. He comes across as someone who's above the fray, untouchable. I don't give a shit about all of these little mobs whining and crying about what I have to say. I'm going to say it anyway, and I'm uncancelable. They're unable to cancel me, right? There's something intoxicating about that among those who are sick and tired of the cancel culture that's been on the left for some time now. So I never understood this whole notion of owning the libs. Remember, that was a big thing starting in 2016. And I was like, what do you get out of it? This guy is total chaos. I mean, he's committing crimes out in the open. He's super corrupt. He almost brags about his corruption regularly.
Yeah.
Okay, so you own the libs. Who gives a shit? Okay, he's destroying things. Shouldn't we be more worried about that? But for the first time, I totally get it. I do. And I hate to say it, but I hate the Trump era. I think it's been so damaging. And so you kind of have to latch on to the few, I don't even want to say good things, but the few things that make you feel a little bit of revenge or whatever. And for me, yeah, when I see some gross corporate liberal losing his or her mind over something Trump said, I get a little bit of enjoyment out of it, because they're part of the problem. I mean, they're part of what led to Donald Trump. They don't know it. They don't see it. They refuse to do any self-reflection to discover it, but it's the truth. And I hate those people. I think those people are the ones who led to Donald Trump. They created the perfect atmosphere and environment for a total clown like him to win. And I wish they realized it because they're going to keep making the same mistakes unless they realize it.
Yeah, I mean, America, the past 40 years is basically a story of uninterrupted downward mobility. And now you have a guy who drives a wedge between the espoused progressive values and their elite material position. And most people just see that as an opportunity to like exact a little bit of revenge on the people who have been the beneficiaries of 40 years of economic policy.
That's so true.
Because even in the moments where they've gotten, let's say there's a bump in the unemployment or the employment statistics under Biden, and there's like a little bit of economic growth, a tiny blip in the uninterrupted downward trajectory of 40 years, that is just simply not enough to overcome the immense amount of resentment, class resentment, essentially, that people feel against this moral fanaticism that has taken over our society's storytellers.
Yeah, let's talk about class resentment for a second, because Senator Sanders seemed to really love Biden. And I think it's because any good thing that Biden did during his presidency was influenced by Bernie Sanders. However, his big infrastructure bill that he loves to celebrate, loves to brag about, was a major corporate handout. No one acknowledges that, and it drives me crazy. I'll give you examples. It allowed for the privatization of public infrastructure. I'm talking about highways, freeways that our taxpayer money paid for to construct that are now going to be managed privately. They're going to implement tolls. They're going to totally devastate working class people who have to travel 20, 30 miles to work because they can't afford the housing near their place of work.
Right.
Okay. All of these corporate handouts that were part and parcel of the infrastructure bill make it really hard for me to celebrate the progress we saw under Biden, because something tells me in a few years, once all of those infrastructure projects really come to fruition, people aren't going to feel like it was an effort to make the lives of working class people better. It was really about, the corporate world needs better infrastructure in order to do commerce. So let's focus on that. And in the meantime, there's going to be all these little giveaways, privatization of our infrastructure in all these different ways that people aren't going to realize until it finally comes to fruition. And it will come to fruition. We're now hearing about how major sections of the 405 freeway in Los Angeles, or I should say California, will be privatized. There will be tolls. And it's infuriating. It really is.
So I agree. The only thing I would add to this is that I think there was an acknowledgement on behalf of the Biden administration that the state needs to spend in order to create conditions of profitability for the private sector. And that, to me, was a little bit of a different tone than what we had seen basically for my entire life. I was born after Reagan was elected. But on that topic, I want to ask you about this theory of the realignment, quote, quote, this idea that Republicans are now the party of the working class. What do you make of this theory?
The Republican Party is not the party of the working class. They never will be the party of the working class. You have Donald Trump just purporting to give a damn about workers when in reality he does not. The realignment is not seen in the power structure of the Republican Party. The realignment is seen among the voters. So if you look at Donald Trump's base, these are people who want a lot of what Bernie Sanders was preaching about in 2015, 2016. They don't feel that the Democratic Party represents them. They look at the two options and they see one presidential candidate pretending to care about class issues.
Right.
And so they moved on over to the right. My whole argument right now is I want to find a way to bring voters together. Because I think that most American voters are concerned about the same things and they want to pursue similar policies. It's just that there's a very real effort right now to keep engaging in like the division and the polarization. There's an effort to prevent these coalitions from forming. And I'm trying to get left-wing voters to understand what I'm trying to do, but they keep mistaking it as me laundering the reputation of right-wing, right-wingers in power. No, the right-wingers in power, they're the same people. They've been around forever. They're the same people. They're pursuing the same cuts to the social safety net. They're pursuing the same, tax giveaways to corporations and billionaires. They're not looking out for you. But the voters that fell for that trap on the right, they're not going to come over to our side if we keep demonizing them and making them out to be racists, homophobes, transphobes, bigots. I mean, these are people who voted for Obama twice.
Right.
You get what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. The constituencies that used to vote in solidarity with the interests of labor, representation through trade unions, labor parties in UK, Poland, Germany, Italy, US, everywhere across the advanced world. The trend has been that those voters have now shifted towards right-wing populist candidates. This is a difficult thing to explain, but if you can notice that trend, you literally just ask people who they voted for, plotted over the course of a few decades. You watch these point shifts between, labor parties and nationalist parties. What that means strategically, if that is indeed the meta-narrative, the larger trend that's happening, is that the left attempting to make moral arguments to liberals to recruit them to our side, to try and compromise on the most cruel aspects of structural inequality, that is a losing strategy because that coalition has never actually existed.
Right.
Whereas right before basically our parents' generation, this coalition actually existed. The people who are presently voting for these right-wing populist parties used to be the labor coalition.
Yes.
That was real, and it won New Deal liberalism, it won social democracy. And as a strategy now, that means that the people that you have been convinced are your political opponents are actually the ones you need to be recruiting. And that is such a dramatic 180 from the strategy that has been deployed basically uninterrupted for the last 8 years. And goes a long way to explain, I think, where we are now. What is it that people on the right have gotten wrong when they characterize your political evolution in the last few years? We've heard a lot about the left, but what do people on the right say that's inaccurate about you?
They keep saying things like, come on over, the water's warm, which is very sweet, okay? Because I actually really admire the fact that the right wants to recruit people. They want to build, coalitions. And by the way, they tend to follow that statement up with, we're a big tent. And right now, the current Republican voting base is a big tent. Okay, the individuals who voted for Trump in 2016, those folks still exist, but I see them as very different from a lot of the new people who decided to switch and vote for Trump this time around. And I have been having conversations with people on that side, and they are, and the left hates when I say this, but it's true, they are a lot more open-minded in that they know I disagree with them on pretty much 85% of the policies that Trump is pursuing, but they see common ground in 10 to 15%, and they're like, come on over, come on over. What they get wrong is that I think that I'm too far left on some of my economic policies. I think that I used to see myself as a political, almost like an influencer, and obviously there's propaganda that goes along with that. I wouldn't have called myself a propagandist, but if I'm honest with myself, I was definitely more a propagandist than someone who was interested in fully informing people about all sides and what's going on. I've changed my mind about pursuing that strategy mainly because I have a better understanding of people who vote differently from me. And I have a deeper empathy toward all voters on all sides, including, yes, right-wing voters. I want them to trust me, and they're not going to trust me if I'm just a propagandist for the left. I think that the political project I want to pursue is the best political project for this country and for working people, but there isn't going to be any buy-in from Trump voters if I'm just constantly demonizing them and, engaging in propaganda. So what I want to do with our show, and I've been doing it with some backlash, but also with some people really appreciating it, is I'll take whatever the political issues are of the day and I'll cover it honestly, fairly. I will not misrepresent the side that the left dislikes. I will represent them fairly and honestly. And it's pursuing a more informative, way of doing things while also providing what I think the right solutions would be. And I think when people feel that you're not judging them or making them out to be bad people, they're more willing to listen to what you have to say, listen to what your thoughts are. If they know that you're giving them accurate information about the stories you're covering, they're more likely to trust you. And I'm really happy to see that there is some portion of our audience who identify as Republicans, but really love the show and what we have to say. They'll write in all the time and they'll say things like, I voted for Trump, but I really, really appreciate the way you covered this story. They're listening. And that creates pathways for possible persuasion. And even if I don't persuade them, I'm at least helping them understand where the left is coming from. So I think one of the biggest benefits is kind of bringing the country together and helping people understand each other. That's one of the main benefits. But the bigger benefit, the bigger possibility is bringing people over to our side with the class-based project that I think is going to save this country.
What country would you like the U.S. economy to resemble most?
Probably Denmark, Finland, Norway. I think the Scandinavian model is the right model. I think it's also the more practical model. So for those who want to pursue a full-blown socialist economy, I don't believe that they want to pursue it because they're not doing what's necessary to win people over to pursue it. We're nowhere near it. And so I've kind of begun thinking a little more practically about things. And you look at other countries that have actually succeeded in creating a better economic system that, by the way, my favorite argument from the right, from the corporatist right, is, well, you like the Scandinavian model, but those aren't socialist countries. They have private industry. And it's like, yeah, cool. And you love private industry, so why don't we implement that model here? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I think that you'd have way more buy-in among American voters if that's the model that you're pursuing. The other argument that you'll hear is, well, those are all white countries. The population is homogenous, and so it's easier to pursue that. I don't buy that argument at all. Yes, we have a pluralistic society in America, people coming from all over the world, different cultures. I get that. I think most people are driven by the same thing. They want economic stability in their lives. Doesn't matter if you're coming from Guatemala, Armenia, Cuba. You want economic stability, and you also want the government to stay the F out of your private life. And by the way, that's a note to the self-described socialists out there who seem to be super judgmental toward the nuclear household. Shut the fuck up. If someone wants to have a traditional household, let them do what they want to do. I would be similarly disgusted by right-wingers who don't think gay marriage should be legalized. They need to shut the fuck up. Mind your own goddamn business. Let people make those intimate decisions for themselves. I don't think the government has any role there other than protecting people. But I think the government does have a role in implementing economic policies that are far more beneficial to working class people.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add about the Nordic countries is they are indeed capitalist countries, right? They're social democratic countries, but the ways in which they won those social democratic policies is because they had, if you go way back in the history, before Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Norway, before these countries are even industrialized, they are backward rural monarchies, but there are existing communist movements because the rest of Europe had already gone through an industrial revolution. So when the factories arrived, you had communists who, their union density was out of control. Sweden also proportionally, the degree to which their industry is privatized, but their union density is enormous.
Right.
Which is actually a pretty compelling argument that the more important factor is union density rather than nationalization. It's kind of like the anomalous example. But those Marxist movements one, the best existing version of liberalism.
Yes, that's
very uncomfortable for people to talk about, but
I know,
important to remember.
That is such a good point. That is true. And, to that point, it's not the governments of these countries that decide what the wages are going to be for workers, right? Here, we rely on the federal government, or in most cases now, state and local government to determine what the wages will be for workers, the minimum wage. That's not the case in these Scandinavian countries with high union density. The unions get to negotiate for higher wages, and that's a far better model. And in fact, even in America, you'll notice unionized workers tend to get paid more than non-unionized workers, and it's because they have a lot more power through these unions to negotiate for better wages.
Yeah. They even, particularly in Sweden, they do something called sectoral bargaining, where it's not just one union versus the employer, but it's all of the unions in that industry. And it's just tremendously powerful in lifting the floor of wages. If there's a young person out there who's listening to this and they're maybe posting all of this like radical stuff on social media, they're saying things like, the left is dead, it's captured by NGOs, nothing is ever going to get better. What would you tell that person?
I would tell them to find the strength to fight, not in the systems that currently exist. Those systems are not going to help you. Those systems either need to be reformed or like tossed out entirely. I would say that they need to find their inspiration among other ordinary people. Don't make the mistakes that I made. Have empathy for ordinary people. Try to understand ordinary people that you disagree with. Understand where they come from, what their life experiences are, how they came to the conclusions they came to, and keep that line of dialogue open always. Don't let anyone convince you that there are good guys and bad guys and you should never talk to the bad guys. Those people have no interest in winning a damn thing. Those people are part of the problem. Keep your mind and your heart open. Obviously, don't let anyone take advantage of you or treat you poorly. But I think what these young individuals who are politically minded will probably come to realize is that the very individuals that they're being brainwashed into thinking will treat them poorly aren't going to treat them poorly. Okay? There's all sorts of false narratives out there about ordinary working people. We need to keep talking to one another and not allow those in positions of power to continue dividing and fracturing us. Michael Brooks is famous for this one statement that he made, which is, I'm paraphrasing. It's not exactly how he said it, but it's like, be kind to people, but vicious to systems or harsh towards systems. And everyone says that they love that quote. They believe in that quote, but they don't actually live that quote because there's a lot of cruelty toward people who disagree with you. And I was in that camp where I thought it was a great quote. I thought I believed in it, but I didn't really believe it until recently. Because being kind to people means avoiding the demonization of Trump voters, really. Avoiding the demonization of private citizens who might have been caught on video acting poorly or being cruel. I think a lot of people are struggling right now. It's not an easy country to live in. I think about what I'm currently going through. Like my mom is in the hospital and has been in the hospital since April 10th, struggling with cancer. She needed a bone marrow transplant. I was her donor. That process worked out, but there were complications that are now keeping her in the hospital. And there are days when I'm just very negative and I've gone through a lot and I want to lash out. And I just think about what it would be like if someone caught me on camera as I'm in the middle of lashing out and saying things that I don't even believe, but I just want to get it out. People are going through a lot in this country where we have a broken healthcare system, where there is almost no path to upward financial mobility. People can't afford housing. We have a drug epidemic with nearly 100,000 people dying on our streets every single year. We're all trying to make sense of this mess that we're living in. So if you believe in what Michael said prior to his passing, then you need to live it. And you need to be kind to people regardless of their faults, regardless of their poor behavior. I think everyone has the opportunity to get better, but we live in a system that makes it nearly impossible to do so. So genuinely be kind to people. Don't look down, look up, because these systems happen to be the issue here, really like holding people back. And I think that we fall for their propaganda all the time. And that propaganda inspires people to fight each other rather than fighting the system.
Ana Kasparian, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. To watch part 2 of this episode, you can support the show on Patreon.